We're open for public comment. Seeing none, we're going to go on to the approval of the minutes.
Second. Third.
Fourth. Pick one. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. We're on to the consent calendar. Anybody need to focus us on anything?
Move adoption.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and that then takes us to item 10. Item 10. Is there a staff report?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll provide the report tonight. Good evening, committee members. This is, we're asking for approval of Lifeline Transportation Program Cycle 5. As you recall, this is a program that comes out of MTC, and they ask that the CMAs do the call for projects and make a recommendation of a program of projects for MTC to fund. In February, the board approved the release of the call for projects and how all that works. We went through the process. We received 5 applications. One of the applications was ineligible because the funding can only go to transit operators. And the staff report gives all the details on this. The City of Concord has since then worked with County Connection, and they're working on going to TransPAC to get some Measure J, Program 19A, and 20 funds to help support the Concord project. Other than that, we have a recommendation for funding 4 projects. The 2 projects in West County we're proposing to fund at the full amount because they asked for less than or equal to what we had kind of set aside for that part of the county. The projects in Central and East County, we are proposing an amount equal to about the median amount of what we had set aside for those 2 areas of the county. So it's less than they asked for, but it's basically what was available. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on this.
Any questions?
Yeah, I want to be clear about Concord. Concord couldn't work it out, but they're okay with where we are with the rest of this?
Yes.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Concord submitted a
We-
plan. When they had with the city about so they're working with TransPAC, and everyone's happy with that.
Yeah, so we had a meeting with TransPAC staff and myself and City of Concord and County Connection, and we worked out kind of a way to move this forward to take it to TransPAC and have the funding come out of there. And at that point, Concord said, fine, we're going to withdraw our application, which they weren't eligible to receive the funds anyway. So
what I was actually wondering is, what I was actually wondering was what it meant relative to their having an appropriate share for their city vis-a-vis getting the having an area that qualified for the funds, or at least were the number 1 criteria for it, which was serving low-income people.
right.
That enabled that to happen, right?
Yeah, so by using the Measure J funds instead of these Lifelines funds, they will still be able to support the Monument Shuttle service. So that service will still continue, for the period of time that they've asked for funds for. So,
Any more questions or comments?
I'll move for Resolution 1835G.
Thank you.
Second.
Whoever you didn't credit the last time, credit this time. All right, and then that takes us to item 11.
Yes, we did. No, we didn't vote. We didn't vote.
Oh,
We
I am,
first and second, yeah.
yes, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Hey, if you have a first and second, you're almost there. Okay, so it passes unanimously. Now we're on to item 11. I'm trying to get us home for the game. Oh, the staff report is getting ready to be presented.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Good evening, PC members. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at CCTA. We are awaiting on Vikrant's suit. I talked to him early today, and I told him we were 200 steps from the BART station. He's coming from MTC. He's supposed to be here at 6 o'clock, but we don't see him. So I'm going to pinch hit for him. And I thought it'd be a good idea to tell you about this thing called Casa. Casa does not stand for anything any longer. So the tagline is Casa, the committee to house the Bay Area. And this is an initiative that's come from MTC and ABAG. And this is a presentation that I gave to the planning directors in May, and I'll repeat it here, and this will be slightly different than the one that Vikrant will come with should he walk in the door. But this is just an overall overview of what's going on. I think it'd be good for the authority to know at this point that there is a committee out there. They are looking at the big issue, which is the Bay Area cannot house its population. The Bay Area has more jobs than employed residents, and we are importing people from outside the Bay Area to work the jobs. And also, of course, there is the incredible housing crunch and displacement going on. And you've all heard about that many times. So just to give you an example of what's been going on in terms of how much housing the Bay Area can produce, there was a time in the not too distant past where we were doing 35,000 homes per year. That's actually before the year 2000. And this shows essentially what's happened with housing in terms of permits issued. And you can just see here the Bay Area going from 25,000 homes per year down to about 5,000 at the peak of the recession. The colors are a little hard to identify, but that's by county. And so since the recession in 2008, we've been building back up to try to build enough housing. But as you know, the jobs have been increasing dramatically. Plan Bay Area 2017 forecasted 1 million new jobs for the Bay Area, and we've already hired 500,000 new people in the Bay Area. So we're halfway through the 2040 forecast for jobs. In terms of housing, we're supposed to build 800,000 houses by 2040, and we've just barely scratched the surface on that over the past few years. So just to look at the magnitude of the problem, talking about the projections that were in Plan Bay Area, and the proposal, the bottom blue here is kind of what we have already. 617 jobs have been added since 2010, and 673 more are yet to come on the housing side. So that's the job side on the left, and then on the right side, on the housing side, the lower blue is the housing we have, and we're supposed to add about 800,000 new homes according to the forecast, and we've added, as it shows here, 56,000 homes. This gives you an idea of just the magnitude of the undertaking. We have a lot of catching up to do if we're going to build enough housing to even begin to address the housing crunch. And here again, separated by sector in terms of income, you can see in terms of low-income housing what was needed from 2007 to 2014, or what's called the RENA number, the projection for low income, and then the brown graph is what was actually produced. And then, of course, just for references, is the job growth. You don't need one house for every job, but you do need about one house for every 1.5 jobs. Moderate income, kind of the same picture in terms of very little production compared to a arena number. The production was about a fourth of the arena number of 41,000. And then to the right, in terms of high income housing, the Bay region is pretty good at producing high income housing, and they've been actually almost meeting the arena production goals there. But again, numbers dwarfed by the number of new jobs added. So the Casa has been working for a while on this, and they've developed some tenets for protection, production, preservation, and production of affordable housing. And they're really trying to address evictions, trying to encourage production, trying to preserve the funding that's out there. As much of it is being possibly taken out to be replaced for other uses, and trying to encourage the production of affordable housing. Production of affordable housing, the price tag on that has gone up. You might experience some sticker shock when I tell you the cost of an affordable house. The last time we talked about it at this committee, it's been a while, but we talked about it. It basically costs $350,000 to produce an affordable unit in terms of the subsidy required to give the developer the money he or she needs to build that house. That price tag's actually gone up to $550,000 per unit now, which seems astronomical, but that's an average for the Bay Area. That is not Contra Costa specific. But to get the thing to pencil out at a low income rate, there's a significant subsidy required.
Martin, to be clear, that's low income, not very low. Or is it?
I think that's an average for the three, for low income, very low income, and affordable. Because we have very little affordable housing left, actually, and so we're talking about the mean income of low income households and the subsidy required, and to get it to pencil out, it's almost 100% subsidy.
Just to illuminate on the problem, because my city, or if we were in the last cycle, we'd just get creamed right now. 75% of our numbers were low and very low. And we were at the 7th highest city in the Bay Area out of 101 for those two. Fortunately, we produced some, and the number came in much lower until Tatson did his appeal and stuck it to us. But the reality is, these bills that we're seeing in the legislation, Weiner in particular, they're now telling you if you didn't make these numbers, the 500,000 subsidy, he wanted originally 200% growth. How are you going to show 200% growth? And I know it's banding around right now between 125 and 150, but if you've got to rezone in some of these places, I don't know about you guys, but I'm in real trouble if I have to do that, because you can count the time it will take to have me recalled in minutes, not hours.
When you're defining a unit, is it a unit is it just an apartment, maybe a one-bedroom apartment, or is it separate units, separate houses?
I don't know. All right. Ta-da! There's the man. So that was a good introduction, wasn't it? 6 o'clock, buddy.
I'm really sorry. I thought it was 6:30, so I was
So Vikram Sood is here from ABAG. He'll continue and do a much better job than I on this. This slide's probably in your deck, right?
sure I can talk.
Okay. But you need your PowerPoint.
I do.
Okay. I'll do an introduction. Madam Chair, Vikram Sood is here from ABAG to tell
Thank
you
you.
about CASA.
I appreciate that and welcome, and we're ready for you whenever you're ready to start.
Sounds good. And again, I'm really sorry. I don't know where the confusion was. It was obviously on my part. But I'm here on behalf of MTC and ABAG to give a brief overview of the CASA process and maybe answer any questions that you might have. I have a very brief presentation, so maybe I'll go through that, see if there are any questions, and then we can go from there. So in terms of what CASA is, let me begin with that it is tied to Plan Bay area. As probably most of you are already aware, the plan had adopted a number of housing-related targets, and the plan did not perform really well on those targets, the housing affordability targets, the displacement targets, and that reflected not necessarily what was proposed in the plan, but what the condition is today in the Bay Area, which is we have a housing crisis. We've had a housing crisis for a long time, and this has been building up for decades. As part of Plan Bay Area, the final adoption, the board and the commission adopted an action plan, as you probably also know, and that included a recommendation to establish this blue ribbon committee that would be then charged to come up with what were called at that time game-changing solutions, but essentially something that will make a difference. The charge was, again, not to nibble at the edges. It was to look at what is the structural issues in terms of why we do not have enough housing for our workforce, why is it unaffordable, and what we can do about it. What it is not is an MTC and ABAG project. The CASA process was specifically structured so that it is outside the MTC and ABAG organizations. The tie back to CASA is clearly your staff. So MTC and ABAG staff would like to be the conduit between the CASA process and the local jurisdictions, and that is one of the reasons why I'm happy to be here today, and we would be more than pleased to come back and keep you updated on what progress we've made so far. But the structure of CASA is such that there are 3 co-chairs, and these co-chairs represent the different sectors we identified as important for this process to succeed. So one of them is from a philanthropy organization, another from advocacy organization, and the third from a business organization. There is a lot wider representation on the steering committee and the technical committee, where we have leaders of various sectors, again, labor, business organizations, local jurisdictions, community-based organizations, and so on and so forth. And really, it's the technical committee. So rather than being one committee, it is now 2 committees. And the technical committee is really charged with coming up with these recommendations, working in subgroups, and they've broken themselves up into groups looking at just production, preservation of existing affordable housing, and then what sort of tenant protections we need moving forward. But again, we see our role as a way to take the feedback that we hear from you and put it, present it back to the CASA committees and the co-chair. In terms of what it will produce, we expect the final package of strategies, which for now we're calling a compact, something everyone will sign up to, would address all the 3 Ps, so the production, preservation, and protection components, and it might have legislative reform ideas, new legislation we might need from the state, some new fund sources. Again, for example, the business community would like to see the impact fee capped or reduced, or some way of making sure that the revenues are not focused only on new development, but that means we have to backfill the local jurisdiction revenue that they would lose by capping the impact fee. So we need to act at a regional level, and the idea is that even if there is legislation or funding that we can get for the region, not necessarily for the entire state, we have our own crisis, and maybe there would be some consensus amongst the different stakeholders to say to our Bay Area legislative caucus that we need these solutions at least to pilot in the Bay Area. So again, there would be some package of legislative reform or relief or new legislation that would enable local jurisdictions to build, preserve, and protect some new revenue sources that we would be looking at that could help not just, like I said, backfill some of the revenue we think the local jurisdictions might lose, but make up for some of the funding we lost when redevelopment went away. And so some of the tools and resources that the local jurisdictions previously had to make some of the development happen or pay for infrastructure, we need to see some of that come back. In terms of why we are coming out in these meetings to get your feedback, again, back to the way CASA was structured, local jurisdictions are represented, but it's not being driven by the local jurisdictions, the whole process. It's broader, there are more sectors and stakeholders involved. But what we want to do is get more specific feedback from our local jurisdictions to make sure that there are no unintended consequences from the package we come up with. There are no gaps. Your priorities are reflected in that final package. So this is one way for us to come out. There is a survey that most of you probably got a link for. If not, I can send it out again. And really, again, the basic questions there are, from your perspective, how do you define the housing challenge in your community? And then what are some of the solutions? So I'll just go through this quickly. So there is a survey. We want to bring the findings back, and I can come back and share the results of that survey. We are meeting with the elected officials who are on the CASA steering committee, who are also members of the ABAG and MTC board, on a monthly basis to keep them involved. We hope to do some open houses across the region once we have the emergence of some form of a package. We have a better sense of what the package includes. And then on an ongoing basis, we want to provide the executive board, ABAG executive board, regular updates, and then any number of meetings that we can come to and provide updates on. So with that, I'll end with just where we are in terms of the process. We are in the process of identifying strategies. So I think this is a good time to hear from you what you would like CASA to address. What does the housing crisis look like here? What are the needs and gaps? And then how can a regional process address some of that? And further down into the winter, there will be a negotiation and prioritization process that will happen. We don't know what this will eventually look like. This is the first time the regional agencies have convened such a process. But like I said, our target is to come up with a package of solutions that works for the broadest set of stakeholders. But with that, let me stop and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, Vibrant, we're going to call it the ABAG MTC solution, not just to be a little nasty, bad mood. Had an interesting ABAG meeting this month. Last month, I forget what they run together. And there was a map that was laid out on the strategies for housing. To me, it was kind of like a precursor to where the RENA numbers were going to go. It was like that first blush of, guess what, RENA's coming real soon, and we're probably looking at numbers to make up for the reduction last time. But it was really interesting in that they put colors and size of the little circles to tell you who was there and who wasn't. And I really wanted to bring that to the mayor's conference to show them. And I don't know how to handle this, but the problem, if you looked at it, was very simple, that there are 3 real big balloons there. And I think the soonest anybody was going to reach their goal, and I think that was dreaming too, was San Francisco in 2065, Oakland in 2365, and San Jose. Somebody needs to get Sam Liccardi in line with no, you're not really close, because he's telling everybody they need to add 6 new homes for everyone everywhere else. But if you really studied that, those 3 little balloons, if they ever got 1-to-1, like beam it down tomorrow, our solutions probably, costs would go away. And instead, we hear about how bad we're doing out here, but our little balloon's barely noticeable, and we're on target to make ours. We're going to get some huge numbers. And then on top of that is the background of Scott Wiener's 828. So you're doing all this study, you're identifying strategies. What have you come up with so far that's going to squeeze the air out of those 3 big balloons that are the problem? And what I didn't bring up before you came here, we talked about the moderate income, how little was built, but it doesn't discuss the 5,000 that burned down on top of that. And I don't know how we're going to build these things when Dave Rabbit's talking about building 5,000 homes a year up in Sonoma County to get, or what, some ridiculous number to get caught up. There just aren't that many construction people. What's going on? I mean, all these things discussed, because when the RENA number comes, we still haven't built anything because, you know, you're playing catch up in Santa Rosa. HCD's just going to, they're going to drop the hammer on us. Am I wrong, or?
No, I think you're right. And I think everyone's in there, you know, what we were seeing. So just rolling back to your point, there's no point just allocating numbers if we are not able to build or if they're not realistic. I think that's where we want the conversations to happen. Allocating the RENA numbers isn't enough. If you don't have redevelopment, if you don't have other tools and policies in place, you're not going to be able to build it. And then the state legislature will continue to try and find some solutions that may or may not work in the Bay Area or other communities, but I think everyone's trying to figure out a solution to the housing crisis, and we just want to make sure that it's thoughtful, doesn't have unintended consequences, is realistic, but is also at scale, and doesn't get us back into these silos of we're going to legislate some land use, or you don't have enough funding, or you don't have funding to even build the infrastructure. Or both. So I think that we're trying to get away from the planning numbers and really looking at what all of the sectors need, and that's why labor is at the table. That's why we have the business group at the table, and it's both employers and developers. And I think we need to also push a little bit our employers to kind of chip in and figure out a way to help us solve the problem.
I'm sorry, can't get close enough to it, but there we go. And we did it while we were deep in the recession. We did a specific plan, and we have since then, we did an EIR for the specific plan, and we have since allocated all of the units that we thought we were going to build, which were a huge number on San Pablo Avenue, where transit is, and they were not called houses, but rather units, because they were high density. And we've used them all up, all of the ones in the EIR, but hardly anything has gone into construction, although they're approved. We got them approved very quickly. We got a quite large project approved in one meeting of the Planning Commission because of our specific plan. So we consider that we've got that part of it in place, but nobody's built much. And what we think it is they can build a unit in San Francisco, or they can build a unit in El Cerrito, and they make a lot more money, the developers, if they build it not in El Cerrito, but in San Francisco. And there are only so many workers to build. So this whole idea that I think early in your conversation you said something about jobs and housing, or maybe that was Martin. I don't know who somebody was saying it, something. And maybe that isn't quite right. Maybe, if anything, the workers are not in the industries that can produce that housing. And I'm no expert, I don't know, but I can tell you that in my city, we've got a stack of projects approved, waiting to be built. We've got developers, and it's not yet happening. And we're kind of waiting, and this is what we keep hearing. So the group of entities that you talked about putting together to do this don't really seem like the ones that will solve our problems. We've done all kinds of things. We have almost but eliminated parking as requirement for the units. We have given all kinds of incentives for extra stories if you do affordable housing. We've got a lot of affordable units in there. It's not what's making it happen. Right. What we feel we need to make it happen is financing to build, and some way that we can compete with those units that are in San Francisco, where they will make a lot more money. That's really what our problem is, because we've gotten it all the rest of the way, and we're really pretty concerned about it. So a lot of the things that you talked about will not help us at all do anything. Right. And it really is a problem.
Right. No, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard quite a bit of that as well. I mean, for sure. And, Bay Area-wide, the market isn't going to get any better than what it is right now. Like, we're really in a very, very hot market. And if in El Cerrito, developers can't bake that pencil, then we need to look at what is it that, is the barrier. Like you said, the financing is the problem. So that is one of the things that we are looking at. We're also looking at if you have a target of a certain number of housing units to be built in a year, where is the construction workforce going to come from, and who's going to train the workforce, and where's the money going to come from? But also, what are the new construction techniques? Is prefab or new technology important in the mix? So I think there is, at least the conversations are happening. I don't think anybody's come up with any concrete solutions yet. I think we are still in the process of defining what are the big barriers, and then, like what you said, maybe the problem in El Cerrito is not about the city not being able to permit housing. It's about developers getting funding. Because
right, and the three groups that you mentioned didn't really seem to me like the groups that would necessarily be able to do that.
Currently, I think that's being addressed under the production work group. So they're looking at both affordable and market rate production.
Well, so do we, but where does the finance, we're not capital, is what I'm talking about.
Right.
Capital funds to construct projects.
Right.
And then workforce to build. So that would be somebody to train workers to build projects of the type that we're seeing we want built. Like in El Cerrito, it's probably projects 6 to 8 stories high. We've got a whole series of them that need to be built. And, the financing has to work, that kind of thing. That's what we need. And I didn't really hear that in what you said.
Sorry, maybe I didn't emphasize that enough. But I think that's exactly one of the things that we are looking at. And the Carpenters Association is on the technical committee, and they have a whole program of training construction workers. There are, some examples of factory-built units where construction workers are not as expensive because it's a, job not on site. So, addressing the cost of construction, addressing the number of construction workers available, like you said, the financing that's available, because again, if you can get 20% return on investment in San Francisco, why would you build anywhere else? Because the construction costs are pretty much the same everywhere. So you have less risk, higher returns in different markets. So I think, I think the conversations are happening. I think you're adding more nuances to the kind of things we need to address. Again, I don't think they've come up with all the solutions, but the brainstorming work is happening. So we'd love to hear more about, those specifics, so we can put them in the mix.
Please.
I'm from far eastern Contra Costa County, and doesn't matter how many houses, how many units we build, everyone still has to get on Highway 4 to get a job. I think what really needs to happen in representatives, you have to have people from the edges of the Bay Area involved in this whole process, because those are the ones that are affected the most. I mean, in the last time we went through this process, all the jobs were shoved into the core Bay Area, once again shoving anyone looking for somewhat of affordability into the outer regions of the Bay Area or beyond, and having them turn around and commute back in. And I think as a transportation agency, we won't be able to keep up with that demand for ever increasing road sizes and anything like that. There's no way that we have the money or anywhere else to do that unless we start getting a reverse commute with the jobs themselves and start working on it that way. And I think it's very important that there's a strong representation from the edges of the Bay Area, maybe even beyond, to be included in this conversation. If we're going to keep packing all the jobs into the core Bay Area, this problem is never going to go away.
So I have something to say. One of the things that's frustrating me personally is with the legislators jumping in and introducing goofy bills that make our job harder. We have to spend a lot of time saying, wait a minute, this isn't going to work, or we get to be negative instead of positive partners in trying to make this all happen. Certainly, right now, we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to deal with AB 2923. It doesn't feel like that's a good solution, certainly from our point of view. And so I think we need to, I swear what we ought to do is have a moratorium at the legislative level so that we can actually get some work done.
Second.
The other thing that I've observed is that it seems like the job centers just want to keep the jobs. They don't want to balance it all out. If we move, a different way of saying what Mr. Romack said is to move the jobs out to where the people are, so that we can be much more efficient about how we're doing things. And yet none of the job centers are willing to part with their money-making opportunities, and they expect us to solve that problem. It's really hard to feel like you're part of the team when you're kind of always blamed for the problem.
Right.
So
actually, I should say thank you for providing all the market rate affordable housing in the Bay Area. But I think the point is well taken. And, so one of the things that we are looking at is leveling the playing field between, the West Bay and the East Bay. A lot of the jobs are concentrated in the West Bay. They continue to concentrate in the West Bay, but there isn't a lot of housing being provided there. The housing is coming from the eastern part of the Bay Area, and that explains a lot of the commutes back and forth, transit as well as freeway. And if you look at the breakdown of the results, which you probably have seen for Measure 3, in Solano and Contra Costa, the measure didn't pass. There were more people opposed to it. Because again, we can totally understand, first you're shut out of the housing market because you can't really afford anything close to where the jobs are, and then you have to pay more in bridge tolls to be able to get to your jobs. It's kind of like a double whammy. So I think one of the things we are exploring, and we would love to get more feedback on that, is how do you level the playing field between the different areas that are interested in creating job centers. And if there is a disincentive or an incentive that could be provided for employers to reconsider where they concentrate, that could be one way for us to, again, help solve the housing crisis, because it's the jobs are tied to the transportation, which is tied to housing.
We are a transportation organization, and you just hit on something that drives me crazy. You're going to raise the tolls, not you, but I mean, we are going to raise the tolls, which should theoretically put more people on transit, particularly BART. And I still haven't seen anything on a drawing board, even a mention from a BART director of how they're going to make Embarcadero or any of those four more accessible. And every time I come to the Metro Center, I have to spend more time trying to get to the escalator to get out of the BART station than I do to get BART in there. It's almost insane. Somebody should be thinking of something. I just as soon wish that we'd beam down a completely different train from West Dublin into the Transbay Terminal and forget them altogether, because I don't think they're ever going to be able to solve this. And they're the ones that had the worst voting record on the BART initiative. I mean, they didn't pass a sales tax to do anything in San Francisco, and we're all commuting to San Francisco. Every one of us, if we sat there in the morning and went on a train, will tell you that every single stop has more people get on than get off. Every stop, every train into San Francisco.
I think it was another way of saying we need to move the jobs out here as well as forcing housing. Okay. Do we have some more comments?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to ask Vikram. So Vikram, I've been kind of watching the Casa meetings, or little snippets of the meetings, and the last one, you really started talking about funding, and Metro Center ABAG MTC has a limited authority in terms of what money they oversee and what they can spend the money on. And you're also a transportation agency, a transportation planning agency, and so the last meeting I saw, they talked about how they have already given money to reward jurisdictions in a certain way. The OBAG funds, for example, 70% of the OBAG funds, the competitive OBAG funds, went into priority development areas. And that's a bit of a linkage there. So we're going to reward jurisdictions that have high-density housing near transit and reward them with OBAG funds to build transit-friendly projects and to encourage transit-friendly housing. But then in the last meeting, there was a discussion about how can we take it further, what other funding sources, what other transportation funding sources can we look to, and should MTC begin to reward jurisdictions that meet their RENA goals with regional transportation funding, and they put all of the funding sources up on the table. And also, just this week, I heard about a possible commercial linkage fee as being something to encourage in the next plan, Bay Area 2050, where jurisdictions would be encouraged to charge employers a fee if they hire somebody, but they don't have the housing nearby, similar to a transportation mitigation impact fee. So it's basically a link to employment, and also just charging. I think some cities are already charging a per head employee fee for new jobs. So I wanted to make to inform the planning committee about that, and I'd really appreciate it if you could just tell us a little bit more about what the funding sources are, what they're looking at, what some of the linkages are that are being explored, because that's kind of what gave me the rationale for bringing it here to the PC, is that you're starting to look at all kinds of transportation funds and new linkages to housing that we haven't seen in the past. I know it's just stuff on the table and just being discussed, but I think it's only fair that you inform us about that.
Sure. I think, as you know, that discussion is going to come back to the MTC Commission soon, I think later this year. I think we are encouraging, to the extent that we can, this group to think about less on sticks and more on tools and incentives. So I think there is an ongoing discussion about whether or not some of the transportation money can be used, or withholding transportation money can be used as a stick to get local jurisdictions to do things differently. I think what we are trying to encourage them to think about is, what is it that, like you said, in El Cerrito, you've done everything right, but you can't get the development built because the city doesn't build the housing. You can permit, you can streamline, and all that stuff. So, right. So, there was one proposal to have a regional mega measure for $40 to $50 billion over the next 20 years. And using that money, again, those are just ideas. So rather than starting to condition transportation funding to look for local jurisdictions, why don't we think about where we need capital, not just for financing, but also for actually funding the infrastructure, the parks and the schools and police and fire services that you would have to provide if you build more housing. Combine that with the need for having some form of a, redevelopment agency to be able to, assemble parcels and, make some of the development really pencil out. So I think that there is a whole range of things that are being discussed. I think we are trying to broaden the discussion beyond what MTC may or may not have authority over, and using that as the only tool, because that's for us that's not going to result in building any homes or protecting any homes. So we need to look broader about what the region as a whole can do. And in terms of the linkage fee, again, I mean, that's a really interesting idea where, we think that if there is a per head, and it's a proposal that's going to be presented to the committee, we haven't even done any preliminary studies on that, but, let's say there is a, big job center on the West Bay, they have a skewed jobs housing ratio, more than 2 to 1, and they add more jobs outside transit areas, then we would expect them to pay some sort of a fee, which we would then want to channel to areas that are providing housing. Again, Prop 13 limits the ability of local jurisdictions to fund services and amenities that go along with the housing. So is there a way to use, some of the revenue we generate through that or through a mega measure or something where the costs are spread across the region, but then we can make some strategic investments based on where the needs are. And it would be across transportation, housing, and community amenities. So I think that's how far the discussion has gone. I don't think there is more specifics than that. But again, again, if there are other ways, you think we should think about the funding and the financing piece, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, one thing, you triggered a thought for me, as we're all building new housing out here, especially where I'm at, we're building lots of new houses, and we're impacting those services that you brought up, police, fire, schools. Right now, it costs $500 million to build a new high school. There is no way that the school district are going to turn to the community and say, let's get a bond together in the size of the city of Opie of 45,000 people and come up with $500 million to build a new high school. And so all these amenities and services have to be provided for eventually, because as we continue to bring more and more people into the Bay Area, there has to be some place that we can provide the police, the fire services, and education services below the college level. And there's no funding out there to do that right now. There's no way to do that right now to continue the growth that we're at and keep up with fire, police, and schools and whatnot. So in this whole plan, there has to be some thought giving to the other pressures aside from just roads and homes and jobs. There have to be thought as, once again, police, fire, and schools. And how are we going to, in those communities where we're expecting a lot of growth, that are brand new growth and not a growth on top of existing growth, brand new growth, how are we going to pay for all those amenities we need to do just to keep up?
If nobody has any, do you have any more questions of us?
No, except I want to apologize again for getting the time mixed up.
At least you'll be able to get off at Embarcadero on the way back. But
I should say it was a struggle getting off the BART station here, and I came in BART. It was a long line.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Okay, that is information only, and now we go on to the other business part of our agenda. And is there other business?
I had asked Randy if he would explain that we've got a sheet that I know Kevin and I saw earlier about BOSS. Just a quick little brief what it is and where we're going to be taking it if possible.
So I'm having, Tim's got a slide that we can put it up on the screen, but we've developed a new slide with Habib's help to try to illustrate mobility as a service. I think that's the direction everybody's headed in. The idea is to roll out a mobility as a service project. There it is on the screen today. It's a comprehensive, it analyzes comprehensively kind of this whole notion of how do you provide a mobility as a service platform. And you have center-to-center communication with data hubs. So one of the problems currently is you have all these data hubs, but you have no centralized location to gather all this data. And so if you're going to provide a on-demand mobility as a service platform, you're going to have to bring in all the data sources. In fact, we have a Clifton here from Verizon. We've had a number of meetings with Verizon to talk about how their data sets can help us, maybe in the city of Oakley or the city of Walnut Creek or San Ramon, to provide all that data, bring it all into one central location, maybe our whatever Tim calls it now, our countywide connected comprehensive data center.
Countywide Connected Data Center?
That's it. He keeps changing the name, then he calls it his own, and I forget. But its idea is you have a center-to-center communication with data hubs. You integrate, you have the analytics, which some of our partners, our potential partners, already have that ability, and then bring together all these initiatives together to provide mobility, because at the end of the day, I think in the future, people, as the cost of transportation goes down, people are going to not going to own their car. They're going to actually share a vehicle in the future. And what they want is they want on-demand service. And so we're going to pilot a MOS platform or project down in San Ramon, Danville area around Bishop Ranch. And the idea is to start out with 25 cars, electric cars, on an on-demand service. So you have real-time information, as it shows on top. Uniform payment center. The idea is you're going to have to pay. Ultimately, a trip planner. So if you can't find a vehicle, you're going to find another method, a guaranteed ride to make it home or to work in the morning. And then you got rewards and incentives. So we've experimented with some of the incentives like Scoop, and we started out with $30,000 and we offered 15,000 rides. That went very quickly. The issue is you looked at the data sets show that most of the users weren't on 24 on 80. They were actually on 680 headed to the Dublin BART station. So a lot of that usage went right into that BART station, which is great for the region, but it's our $30,000, and it looks like it's going into Alameda County. And so 24, there's very little usage. There's very little usage on 4. And so we're trying to figure out a way of convincing the MTC that maybe there's an opportunity here for a very small amount of money to incentivize this across the region. And so we're one of the areas that's looking at the rewards and incentive along with San Mateo County. Is that correct, Tim?
Yeah, they're looking.
Yeah. And so then we have transportation network companies, ride sharing and ride pooling on the side. And then we're looking at charging parking. Walnut Creek, you're getting open parking spaces in certain locations because it costs more on the street than it does. And that's really what you're trying to do, is drive the people into parking structures. I complain about the extra cost now, but we did talk about that a long time ago, and Rebecca reminds me that I used to say that, raise the cost of parking on the street, put people in the parking lots or the structures, and you'll have a couple spaces open for those people that just want to come in, spend some money, and then get out and pick up laundry or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then our SAV shuttles and transit, so we're going to provide connection protection, real-time ride sharing, and dynamic dispatch, make sure the connections between the transit modes are better, they're protected, so that when a person gets out of BART, if BART is late, and the bus takes off on time, you might end up having a 13-minute wait because you have a 15-minute headway and the bus took off 2 minutes. And then we're trying to connect the bicycles, so you notice line bikes are all over. Well, how do you then connect that bicycle or electric bikes in the future, which we're looking at? How do you connect that to make that part of the guaranteed ride? and your car sharing is going to be important. And then ultimately ride sharing. And so what we're saying is with this platform, ultimately we're trying to get a mode shift, get people in another mode of transportation other than a single occupant vehicle. And if you notice on certain holidays where not everybody takes off, like I'll use Martin Luther King Day, freeways operate great, the roads operate great. Just a small percentage of the population takes that day off. Spring break too. So we're trying to simulate that all year long, somehow using these incentives, and we call it a mobility as a service. So if you came to the Redefining Mobility Summit this year, we had 3 speakers from Europe. They did a great job. And I think that it's always good to hear from somewhere else that actually have deployed this and it's in operation. Do you have anything to add, Tim, on this?
Well, I would just say we're actually, this graphic actually came with the team. We're preparing an Advanced Transportation Congestion Management Technology Deployment Grant application. It's due on June 18th. And we're developing what we're calling Moss Bay Area. And so we've had a lot of interest from BART, MTC, and some of our other local CMA partners, also CAP Corridor, to really get involved with a regional Moss platform in the Bay Area.
And then Peter, recently we received a grant. You want to talk a little bit about that grant that kind of fits into the electric vehicle charging grid, since we have the floor?
Yeah, we received some grant funds from the California Energy Commission to prepare our EV readiness plan, so we'll be moving forward with that very quickly.
The question I have is, anybody talk to anybody about freeway accessible ride-sharing motorcycles? Because oddly enough, I think that's going to be a little bit of a game changer too. I can't believe how many of these people just pass me and go in the diamond lane if you can get on the freeway. And I'm seeing more and more of ride-share vehicles parked in places, apartments and condos around, where they keep them for a couple days or whatever and turn them back in. And if you're ride-sharing to work and you have this option to go home, people are doing it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. News clippings and correspondence all done, and I am getting distracted. At this moment, the score is Golden State 35, Cleveland 42. Let's hope that turns around. This meeting is adjourned until the next regular meeting on Wednesday, July 11th at 6 o'clock. Thank you for coming.